Hi, this is the voice of Heidie Calero with another interesting economic capsule in Puerto Rico. And this time we are going to extend our net beyond the island, and let's look at what other countries have been doing. In particular, our experience with a recent trip that we did to Singapore, and we were impressed that Singapore came to Puerto Rico back in the 1950s, 1960s and copied the economic model of Puerto Rico, and they implemented it. The difference is that they had a dictator, an illustrated dictator, and today it is a very strong hand prime minister parliamentary system, but it is working. And in this first graph, as you see, as I'm depicting here, Singapore is an archipelago. And Puerto Rico is 13 times bigger than Singapore. So you would expect that we had more potential for growth than Singapore, as you can tell from the difference in the map in terms of its size and in terms of its composition. What does Singapore have? It doesn't have oil, it doesn't have tremendous natural resources, but yet let's look at what Singapore has been doing. And this graph depicts for us the growth, the tremendous growth that they have done over the past maybe 7 decades. And the blue line that they are depicting here is Puerto Rico's GDP per capita compared to the US GDP per capita level. So back in the 1950s, Puerto Rico was poor and about 21.5% of the US levels per capita GDP level. We don't have the statistics for 1950 for Singapore, but we do have it for 1960. At that time, it was only 16.7% of US levels in terms of GDP per capita, but Puerto Rico was already making headways in terms of its economic model. It was really the boom of the golden age of Puerto Rico. We had nothing to lose except poverty, and Puerto Rico is making strides. It was already 30.7% of US levels. It reached almost 50% by 46% by 1970, and thereafter it started declining, as you see with the blue line. That was the recession of 1975 and the start of the huge dependence of Puerto Rico on federal funds, the food stamp program, which in my opinion has really made Puerto Rico less needy and less with that hunger for achievements. But nonetheless, for Singapore, the story is different. It has kept on making progress, as the red line that you see there. And in 2022, Puerto Rico has been in recession since 2007, and now it's about 54.5% of US levels, and Singapore is 107% of per capita US GDP levels. The table that you're seeing here is economic indicators. It's sort of a summary, a bird's eye view in terms of a comparison of Puerto Rico in 2022 versus Singapore. In terms of land extension, as I said, Puerto Rico is 13 times bigger than Singapore, so it's 13,791 square kilometers, while Singapore is 728.6 square kilometers. And that's part of the story, as we will see with the long-term planning of Singapore. It was not all the time 728 square kilometers. It has taken land from the sea. Population in Puerto Rico, 3.1 million people, whereas in Singapore, in a stretch of land which is smaller, 5.6 million people and growing. Babies are being born in Singapore, and they expect that in 2030 there are going to be almost 6 million people. GDP in current prices in US dollars, $113.4 billion in Puerto Rico, whereas Singapore, $466.7 billion. So that's almost 3 times Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico is 13 times bigger than Singapore and close to the US. GDP growth rate from 2000 through 2022 in Puerto Rico, an average annual growth of 3%, whereas in Singapore it's 7%. It has been 7% on an annual basis. That's extraordinary. GDP per capita, current prices, it's about $33,289. And in Singapore is 77,710. It is true, they do pay taxes, but they get their values worth for their taxes. Unemployment rate is 8.1% in 2022 in Puerto Rico, and in Singapore 2.6%. So more population and more working population. And key economic sectors, as well as Puerto Rico, it's manufacturing. Puerto Rico's pharmaceuticals and electronics and some services, whereas in Singapore, it's high-end manufacturing. It's not only oil refinery, it's also the manufacturing of electronics and chips and computers. And it's also a very heavy, intense port for trading merchandise and commodities. And it's a very busy hub, and as well as services, because tourism is really making some inroads as well. But what has been the key for Singapore's enormous progress? It's long-term planning, and I'm illustrating here the green plan. By 2030, the target that Singapore has is that they're going to double the annual tree planting rate between 2020 and 2030 to 1 million more than in 2020 in terms of trees. They are going to increase nature parks land area by over 50% from the 2020 baseline. Every household will be within a 10-minute walk from a park. And by 2030, they are expecting that 80% of all buildings, and they are currently having that, they all must have greenery. You can see those hanging gardens. You almost think that you're in Babylon, but in modern times. Even along the roads, you see all of these bougainvilleas. It's really the garden city. Why can't Puerto Rico do the same? Key, long-range planning. And by 2035, they are going to even add an additional 10 square kilometers of green spaces. Another long-term planning, water. They have a treaty with Malaysia that ends in 2060, taking water from the nearby river, and they already have made the arrangements that they have these more water and desalination plants. That these new water plants are able to meet up to 40% of the country's total daily water need. So Singapore is doubling from the 430 million gallons it currently consumes each day. So the National Water Agency is really more into trying to substitute the end of the treaty with Malaysia by 2060. They are not waiting until 2059 to do anything. This is long-range planning. And then finally, another example of long-term planning is reclaimed land. Back in 2014, Singapore had 590 square kilometers. Now it has 720 square kilometers. That's about 22% new ground area. And in that ground area, as you can see here in these two photos, on the left-hand side, that was the area that was barren. There was nothing there. It was a dump. Today, in that same area that you see in the left, on the right-hand side, you see this Bay Marine tremendous luxurious hotel, which looks like an airplane, even though it is like a ship mounted on these three big buildings, skyscrapers. And truly, this is all on reclaimed land, and it's greenery. So if Singapore has been able to do it with an autocratic prime minister, if things work, why can't that be some of the lessons that we can learn from Singapore? If you liked our economic capsule, don't forget to go to YouTube under the voice of Heidie Calero. Give us a like, because this is a service of Puerto Rico Economic Pulse. And don't forget that the economy is all of us. Thank you.